It's time for the movie review, and tonight I'm going to talk about Escape from Planet of the Apes. Escape from Planet of the Apes takes place with the main characters, as we've seen in the previous Planet of the Apes saga, the original saga. And they take a shuttle, escape from Planet of the Apes themselves, because the war was going on between the apes. So they escape, and then apparently the Earth gets blown up, and they land back in time, but they land on the exact same place, which is Earth, and it's in present time this time. So they're greeted by humans and whatnot, and have a warm welcome, and the apes explain their situation, and things turned out to be okay at first, until later on, when the discovery that they have an ape child, things go haywire. Like they think that the kid's going to be a threat and it's going to destroy humanity, because he knows he's going to learn how to talk just like these apes and so forth. So basically these apes are becoming a major threat later on to humanity, and fear that the apes are going to take over and so forth. So that kind of sets it up, the myth about, as we've seen in the original Planet of the Apes. So my opinion about this, I think this film is inferior, like story-wise. The reason why I say it's inferior, because let's rewind to Planet of the Apes 1, the original Planet of the Apes. So, Planet of the Apes, we see Taylor, his space shuttle crashes, lands in the water, sinks later on, and that sets the journey to go to Ape City, right? Of course. And then, of course, he gets injured, and then he has to basically write down his thoughts because he can't speak. Well, the scene where he's trying to explain how he got there, he talks about the shuttle, right? And then the main ape character doesn't believe him, and says, "You tell me that you did this," and he says, "Not this. I flew," and the main ape character doesn't believe him that space flight was even capable about this, let alone why would you travel? That was the question. I mean, if you watched Planet of the Apes, that was in the dialogue between these characters. That's what they said. They don't believe him. They don't understand why would they even think about flight. Where would they go? That's what it was. So back to Escape from Planet of the Apes. It makes no sense to me why suddenly we just have an ape scientist with the main characters, main apes, and then they dig up the space shuttle from the water, or my guess is if they remade a whole new shuttle and decide to, leave the planet through space flight. Now, again, it makes no sense, because how would they even know any of this? Because they don't know anything about space flight, let alone ingenuity of any kind. Now, I'm not saying they didn't study science themselves to a degree on that, but I'm saying that there's no way they would have just simply learned how to operate this thing. Okay, even if they had some kind of an idea in this short amount of time. Now, the reason why I say in short amount of time, now again, it mentions about the apes having a war, and the Earth blows up in that time frame. Well, I like to think that in this time frame that Taylor has been gone from Ape City probably between 4 to 5 weeks time wise, because we see him go off in the distance to go find his own way of living and with the girl and whatnot, and we just see kind of a happy ending, I guess, in a way. And then of course he disappears, and that's where it sets up beneath Planet of the Apes, obviously. But I'm talking about the fact that this is still in the same time frame. This is not like back in time type of deal thing. This is not an alternative reality or anything like that. This is literally in this time frame, and Taylor has been gone, whatever, and then we see that the girl comes back and talks to the main character, ape characters, and that's where we see the other traveler to find Taylor and so forth. So it makes no sense right off the bat, like this, they just suddenly understand ingenuity and all this stuff. I mean, it honestly, it's not plausible because they didn't understand that, let alone build anything like that within this short amount of time due to this war going on, apparently. So another thing that I found out was inferior, that the dialogue about the line where Zira kind of spills the beans and says about, how it all started, and it says Aldo said no. Well, that's where I think that's inferior right there, that line. I don't think that ever happened, because if that was the case, then you're put in another timeline with Conquest for Planet of the Apes, then, if that's the case, because Aldo technically is only in battle for Planet of the Apes, meaning that he's a quote general, and he's like a child basically, and we see him, he rebels against the humans and he hates humans and whatnot, but he also rebels against Caesar, who doesn't like his authority, and he basically wants to take over and so forth. And that, again, we get another war against humans and what's left of them against the apes and so forth. So Aldo, now I can understand, I can even believe that Aldo may have been in Conquest for Planet of the Apes. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, or if there's any added information about Aldo being involved in Conquest for Planet of the Apes. Maybe he was a prisoner himself. Maybe I can believe that. I really can. Maybe he escaped the compound before all those bombs dropped or whatnot at that time frame. But I don't believe that he was the one that started all this whole war rebellion, because obviously Caesar is the main focal point of this film, and in that film, and he started all that. He's the one that rallied up all the apes to say no and this and that. But I don't, how it all started. No, I definitely didn't how Aldo said that. So again, that's another piece of evidence that I think that doesn't really quite fit within this film, but it does stick to the same feel, the same atmosphere as you saw in Planet of the Apes, beneath Planet of the Apes, even Conquest for Planet of the Apes, including Battle of Planet of the Apes. The environment, I mean, it fits exactly as you've seen before. It doesn't really go off the rails or try something completely different. It stays within that confines. But I felt that as far as a story as a whole, it just seems inferior, the whole thing. Like, none of this would have actually really happened. But again, we wouldn't have this film or this film. I understand that. I understand that the studio wanted another sequel. I understand, that they want to continue it. But, like, to me, it just didn't quite make sense why you just suddenly put this in there. And when clearly, honestly, I think it was an overlook area, in my opinion. But that's what just kind of iffed me. It's like, well, how did that even happen? So I will say this film, story-wise, it does a fine job on its own. It's not my favorite out of the sequels, in my opinion. It just seems kind of drawn out in a way. I mean, it doesn't really set up much of anything. I mean, I guess it just kind of fills in the blanks from the previous sequel, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. But I will say that the characters, the actors, does a well job. The costumes, the masks, I mean, does a really good job for what they are. I mean, they didn't really make it different with that. They didn't change anything to where, like, well, make you question, like, well, why'd you do this? And, no, same thing, nothing majorly different. But, we see these characters just trying to survive at this point and trying to make something, But obviously, there's always that confliction between humans and apes. There's always that that same morale, the same how do I want to say it? The same way we always say that between good and evil. Well, there's always that confliction. There's always that inferior, there's always one group that doesn't like this group and so forth. And there's always that discrimination, and that leads to violence, that leads to death and so forth. And that's what Planet of the Apes has always been like that throughout the whole saga. Humans versus apes, and except for obviously in Battle for Planet of the Apes, we also have, to a degree, apes, versus ape, but briefly, but for the most part, humans versus the apes on that case. But I just didn't care too much about this particular film. Story-wise, I mean, it's a closed chapter, sure, for these two main characters, which sets up for Conquest for Planet of the Apes, sure. I mean, again, I think just some of the facts that's involved in this film is kind of rearranged to where it sets up for these other sequels beforehand, or at least explanation-wise, which I do appreciate that, but I just feel like, this part, should have just been completely taken out. But again, I understand story reference and continue the story. Sure, I appreciate that. But if I were to give this ranking out of a 10, I'll definitely give it a 7 for sure, because we have our main cast, and they do a phenomenal job playing these characters. Decent story, sure. Definitely stays in the confines of Planet of the Apes itself, and I don't have that tremendous amount of complaints about this other than what I've already explained. But it's a decent film. It's definitely something that you want to hold on to your Planet put in your Planet of the Apes collection. I will definitely say though, Planet of the Apes themselves has a better definition between humanity, society, or society itself, between both races, than pretty much any other types of films like that outside of Planet of the Apes. But if anything, we can always enjoy what Planet of the Apes was given to us, and it's a harsh reminder too of how we behave toward another and society and everything else, all the far and beyond. But this film, it's like a point A, point B in a way. There's really nothing to feel much in between as far as these two characters go, because they're on the run. And that's pretty much it. They're on the run, and if you've seen this movie, then you know the outcome. But do I think it should have stayed on modern times in a way, present time? I think it does okay. I mean, I like the fact that it doesn't spend too much time how apes, the main characters, adapt to society. I like that, sure, we see them shopping, we see them wearing people's clothes or their own tailored clothes and, whatnot. But we don't get like this whole, them being in this world, being interactive in this world, this modern world and whatnot. They just do what they got to do, and focus on the story of the characters between what's going on in the situation, rather than them being in this society where they got cars and all this other modern technology and whatnot. They moved along with the story, which I definitely appreciate. They didn't just focus on, it's a here's how they interact with this. No, they don't focus on that. They focus on the confliction and the outcome and the future between humanity and other species, and in this case apes.